Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Indra Frank. I'm with the Hoosier Environmental Council. Welcome to How to Watchdog Water and Wetland Permits. We've got a relatively small group this evening, so I'd like to keep things conversational and start by going around and having everybody introduce themselves. If you would, please just say your name and an organization, if you're with an organization, and maybe where you're located in the state, and if you have a favorite water body nearby. For example, my name is Indra Frank. I'm with the Hoosier Environmental Council. I live in Indianapolis near Fall Creek, and I like to go walking along the creek. And I'll just call on folks as I see them across my screen. Seymour?
Hi, my name is Cy Moskowitz. I live in Valparaiso. I used to teach at the Valparaiso Law School for many years. I'm now retired. And I like to walk along Lake Michigan and some of the streams and lakes in Northwest India.
Wonderful. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Beal. I'm with the White River Alliance. Even though our office is in Fountain Square in Indianapolis, I live over by Richmond, Indiana. And I guess my love of wetlands grew as a child with several on my parents' property.
Great. Nick? Let's see, not hearing anything at the moment, so I'll come back. Doreen?
Yeah, hi, I'm Doreen Carey. I live in Gary, Indiana. I've been involved with protecting Lake Michigan and the wetlands in our area for many years, and I'm on the board of Save the Dunes.
Thanks. Nick, are you there? All right, Eva?
Hi, I'm Eva, and I volunteer with Raft River Assessment Field Team with the White River Alliance here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I guess I'm most interested in the White River because of that.
Great. I'm sorry I mispronounced your name too.
Oh, that's fine.
Barbara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Barb Hargrove. I live in Hammond. I'm with PDA. I'm with League of Women Voters, Lake Michigan region. I'm with a multitude of things. Save the Dunes. Just anything and everything I can do to clean up this place.
Making the world a better place. Douglas?
Bloom where you're planted, right?
Hi, my name is Doug Cieslak. I'm a hydrogeologist and a volunteer with the Hoosier Environmental Council.
Great. Susan?
Yes, this is Susan Reed. I live on the White River in Indianapolis, and I'm on the board of the Friends of the White River. So that's my one love.
Nancy? Nancy, do you want to introduce yourself? All right, pass for now. Nick, if you're there, would you like to introduce yourself? All right. Well, in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and go on. I love that we've got people from different parts of the state here. Susie, if you could go ahead and start the. Oh, and I'm sorry, Susie, you should introduce yourself as well. I'm about to skip my own colleague.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susie, and I'm also with the Hoosier Environmental Council, and I live in West Lafayette, really close to a little wetland called Celery Bog, and I go there almost every day, so that is my favorite waterway. And I will start.
Yeah, if you could go ahead and start the slides. Susie and I are both with the Hoosier Environmental Council. The Hoosier Environmental Council is an Indiana not-for-profit organization. It has been around since 1983, working for a healthy environment and a sustainable economy for our state. Today, we're going to talk about how to watchdog wetland and water permits. And please note that tonight's webinar is part 1. Our objective is to help you get started looking at water and wetland permits so that more of the water bodies in Indiana can benefit. We're planning to pause once in the middle for questions and then take more questions at the end. But if you think of something while you're listening, please go ahead and put it into the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording as well as the slides accessible to you afterwards. We are also working on a written guide that will include resources to help you. And once that guide is complete, we'll give you access to it. We're going to start with an introduction on the regulations that these permits come from. Then we'll go over tracking permits, prioritizing which permits to work on, and we'll end with an introduction to drafting comments. And if you wouldn't mind going ahead and putting yourselves on mute until you're actually asking questions later, that'd be helpful. Right, so we'll end with an introduction to drafting questions. So why track and comment on permits? Well, you all signed up for this webinar, so this is probably obvious to you, but I'll go ahead and list reasons. First, by commenting and raising relevant issues, we may be able to change how the permit is written and reduce environmental harm. Second, permitting helps bring the community voice into the decision-making process. And finally, submitting comments on some types of permits helps establish standing in case of future litigation. So there are some permits where once the permit is finalized, you're only eligible to challenge that permit if you participated in the public comment process ahead of time. So the next slide shows the water cycle, and it's here to remind me to offer a note of caution. We all know that water moves through the water cycle, but the permits don't necessarily acknowledge that fact. The permits we're talking about artificially categorize different types of water, and this is because the regulations were written to try to specify which requirements apply where. Unfortunately, this means that the regulations tend to ignore the natural connectivity of our water resources. So to comment on permits effectively, it's necessary to stay within the regulatory framework. And here's the tip to keep in mind: to effectively track and comment on a permit, one has to go along with the segmentation of water types that's in the regulation. If you were to submit comments that ask for solutions that make perfect sense in the real world, but are outside of the bounds of the regulation, the regulatory agency would not have authority to act on your request. So that's my caution to you, is your comments are going to be most effective if they stay within the regulatory boundaries. So we'll go on to the next. To talk about water and wetland permits, we need to start with a brief overview of the water regulations in Indiana. So which laws, which water bodies, which agency, and we'll also talk about which activities are under regulation. So first, let's start with the laws that apply to water and wetlands in Indiana. They are the Clean Water Act, the Indiana Isolated Wetlands Law, and the Indiana Flood Control Act. There are other laws that have an impact on water, but these are the three that most directly apply to our water bodies. These laws create the requirements for the permits that we can comment on. Also on the list are local and city and county government ordinances, and they're there just as a reminder that sometimes those are worth looking at, because our cities and counties can pass floodplain or zoning ordinances that affect our water bodies. We just won't have time to cover them in these webinars. Okay, so going on and focusing on those three laws, we have the three laws there down the left-hand side, and which water bodies they apply to on the right-hand side. The Clean Water Act applies to the federal waterways and wetlands. Those are often referred to as waters of the U.S. You may have heard the term WOTUS, which stands for Waters of the U.S. In fact, it even made it into the news in late August because there was a court decision that shifted the WOTUS definition. While the WOTUS definition shifts around, any wetland that is not WOTUS is a state wetland, and those are regulated under Indiana's isolated wetlands law. And fortunately, that law is flexible so that if WOTUS changes, it also changes which wetlands are covered by the state law. The Indiana Flood Control Act applies to rivers. So we'll go on, and these laws apply to certain regulated activities. So the permits that we're looking at are for those permitted activities under the laws. When it comes to the regulated activities that we're looking at, the Clean Water Act has 3 sections. Section 404, which applies to dredge and fill of the federal waterways or wetlands. Section 401, which applies to water quality certifications. And Section 402, which applies to discharge of waste into waterways. The Indiana Wetlands Law applies to dredge and fill for the state wetlands, as opposed to the Clean Water Act 404, which applies to the federal wetlands. And then the Indiana Flood Control Act applies to construction in a floodway. Different agencies implement the different laws and issue the related permits. The Clean Water Act Section 404 permits come from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then you'll see that the next 3 are issued by the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. So that would be the Clean Water Act Section 401, Section 402, and then the Indiana Isolated Wetlands Law. All of those permits come from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. And then the Indiana Flood Control Act is implemented by the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. These agency names are usually easier as abbreviations. So this is the same list as in the last slide, but using the agency abbreviations and putting in their logos as well. Army Corps there for the Section 404, then IDEM for the 3 types of permits, and DNR for the Indiana Flood Control Act. So now that I've gone over a brief overview of the regulatory framework, I'm going to pass to my colleague Susie for the next steps.
Thanks, Indra, for that great overview of water resource regulation in Indiana. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about tracking water permits and prioritizing water permits. So when we're talking about tracking water permits, we mean, we are routinely monitoring those public notices on a regular basis. And for the purposes of this training, we are going to be focusing on those permits that Indra previously discussed under those permit programs. So these will be the Section 401 water quality certificates, the Section 402 NIPDES permits, the Section 404 dredge and fill permits, the state isolated wetland permits, and then construction in a floodway permits. So there's going to be 3 basic steps in tracking. The first step is you're going to want to sign up for public notice notifications on the agency websites. The second step is that you want to navigate through those agency websites and just get familiar with the website itself, as well as we'll look through a couple permits in this training. And then step 3 is to get organized, so that way you can prepare a space to put all of your research before we start getting into the commenting process. All right, so for steps 1 and 2, I'm going to be using the IDEM public notice homepage website to show you guys how to sign up for public notice notifications and how to navigate through those agency resources. And so on this website specifically, they only issue, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management only issues water quality certificates, NIPDES permits, and state isolated wetland permits, as Indra mentioned. So if you are interested in signing up for the floodlight or the 404 dredge and fill permits, we are going to be sending a handout sometime next week. So please refer to that to look through that and sign up for all of the agency
Go to your
notifications.
bed. Go to your bed, please. Go to your bed.
All right, so we will go to the homepage. Can everyone see this? Yeah. All right, so this is going to be the main landing page for all of the public notices that are issued by IDEM. So you won't just find the water permits on here, meaning that you will have to sort through the public notices to find what you're looking for, but this should become pretty intuitive as you become more familiar with the website. So we will go down here. And are you guys able to see this map, or is the Zoom? You can?
Yes, yeah, the map's showing up. Thank you.
All right, so on this right-hand side, you'll see that Indiana is divided into 8 different regions. And on the left-hand side, you'll see those corresponding regions and a link to access the main page for public notices. So we've got Central Indiana, Eastern Indiana, Northeast Indiana, and so on. So these public notices, they're going to be issued on a regional basis. So rather than signing up for a specific permit or a specific county, you'll have to sign up for the entire region. So let's just say in this case, we're going to be signing up for public notices for Central Indiana. So what we want to do is we'll click on Central Indiana, and this will take us to the home page, right, for the Central Indiana public notices. So we'll see here public notices for Central Indiana. And then it also gives us a list of the counties, again, that are covered in this region. So I'll go over this all in just a minute, but we are going to scroll down to the bottom a little too far. So what you're looking for here is this header that says receive updates via email or text message. So underneath that, it says you can subscribe to the regional public notice pages. And so that's what we want to do, right? We're going to sign up for those public notice notifications. So we hit subscribe, and it'll take you to this page. And you have the option of signing up for email notifications or text message notifications. I prefer email just because I don't want to receive a text message from IDEM every time that public notice is updated. Yeah, so you can choose the subscription type, and then let's just say we're doing email, type in an email, and then you'll hit submit. And so whenever you hit submit, you should receive an email verifying that you signed up for that public notice region. And that is a quick intro on how you sign up on IDEM's website for public notices. And so again, this is for the Nittis permit, isolated wetland permits, and the water quality certificates. So I'm going to go back to this page here. All right, so all of the public notices are for the central region will be found on this page. And so we'll scroll down and just kind of go over what we're looking at. So these blue headers are going to be the counties. So we've got Bartholomew, Boone, Brown, and so on. And then any public notice that affects multiple counties will be listed here. And then at the top, we can see this is kind of organized into a table-based format. So we've got the name of the facility, which is usually the permittee. And then we also have the type of notice or event, which is where you will go to find a specific water permit. We've also got the publication dates, which will give you the date that the public notice, the permit application has been put on public notice. And then this is the date that public comments are due. And then the next column we have is if it's available for public comment. So this is just a yes or no column. And then this final column is any additional information related to the permit. So typically they'll put the project manager or a permit ID number. And this is going to be more useful when we start preparing public comments. But for right now, just know that this column is there and we won't worry about it too much. So that is the overall layout of what the website looks like. So when we are on this page, we are looking for water permits, right? So this is the focus of this training. So we want to locate this column that says type of notice or event. And generally speaking, we'll scroll down here and the water permits are going to be labeled under something like public notice or draft permit public notice. And so that being said, if you are on this website and you have the time to go through and open each one of these just to get yourself familiar, I definitely recommend doing that, but we are just going to focus on those water permits. So the draft permit public notice usually corresponds with a Nittis permit. So what we'll do is we'll click on that and we can see right here, the Office of Water Quality proposes the following Nittis draft permit. All right, so let me just zoom out a little bit. So this is going to be the first page of a Nittis permit application, which is just going to be the cover page. And below it, they will attach the actual permit application. So let's go back. So at the top here, we have a public notice number, which is just, if I could highlight, a unique ID number, again, that if you want to search up any documents related to this specific permit, you can do that on IDEM's virtual file cabinet, which is an online searchable database, but we'll go over that again when we talk more about preparing public comments. And so similar to the table, the top will have the date of notice. So whenever this permit application was put on public notice, and then the date that the response is due. So whenever public comments are due. And then in this section right here, this will give you a general overview of what's going on. So this will tell you if it is a new permit, a renewal permit, or a modification of an existing permit. And then this section, this first bold area will tell you who the permittee is. And then it'll just give you some general information on the county, the location, what kind of facility. So in this case, this is an industrial pretreatment facility. And then it'll also tell you how many gallons they're discharging and where they are discharging to. And then under here, these are just the regulatory procedures. And this part will be particularly important since we are going to be preparing comments for permits. You'll want to pay attention to this section because that gives you the instructions on how to go about submitting those public comments. So that is what a very quick overview of what a Nittis permit looks like. So we're going to go back. And let's go to the public notice. So this one is for a state isolated wetland permit. And so we will see here that it's going to be pretty similar to a Nittis permit. So at the top, you've got the publication date. So again, when it was put on public notice, closing date, when public comments are due. And then over here, you've got that unique ID number for IDEM's website. And then if there are any federally regulated waters, they will also need to apply for the 404 dredge and fill permit. And so if they did that, that corresponding ID number would be here. And so this section just again tells you what permit they're applying for and the specific regulations that they have to adhere to. And then this section right here is going to be really useful when we talk about prioritizing water permits, because this is going to give you really all of the information you need for that, or most of the information. So right here, we've got the applicant, so who was applying for the permit, and then we have the agent, so who are they applying on behalf of? And then we've got the project location, the affected water body. So in this case, it is 2 forested wetlands. And then we've got a project description. And so they are proposing to place 0.87 acres of fill into those class 2 forested wetlands. So that just gives you a project description. And then this section right here, again, similar to the Nittis permit, it just goes over the regulatory procedures. So you'll see instructions for commenting on the permit. So they're pretty similar. And then they'll also attach some draft preliminary design plans and maps with the permit, which I'm not going to go through, but just be aware that they are there and attached to the bottom of the permit. And so the water quality certificates look very identical to the state isolated wetland permits. So I'm not going to go over the water quality certificates for the sake of time tonight, but I did want to show you guys just basically what they look like. So if you've never seen one before, you feel a little comfortable if you have to open one up. So we're going to go back here, and before I field any questions, I just want to note one thing. So you'll see that I didn't click on these final permit public notices, which is really similar to the draft permit public notice. So this corresponds with a Nittis permit, but it's the final issued permit, right? So it's not available for public comment. And you can see that in the column here. So I just wanted you guys to be aware of, that's why I didn't point that one out. So I'm gonna go back up to the top. And if anybody has any questions about all that I just went through very quickly, please type it in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and we can virtually raise your hand and we can call on you. For about 5 minutes, we can field some questions because I know that was pretty fast.
Yeah, so Barbara?
How do you know when you look at this what the fill would do? I mean, when you look at the report, I mean, you're filling in wetlands, so it's just, to me, it's an automatic no.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you are referring to the state isolated wetland permit as an example?
The one that you just shared with us. I mean, when you look at it, it's just, all it says is that they're going to fill it in with supposedly clean fill, whatever that means.
That's a little too close. So yeah, this project description right here is just basically telling you what they propose to do, right, in terms of construction. So right. They're just going to place clean fill in almost an acre of class 2 forested wetlands to construct an industrial building development. So go on with your question. I'm sorry. I feel like
no, I'm just saying, there's just not enough information there.
Yeah, it is. They do keep it very brief, which is why we'll talk about prioritizing these water permits and get into beyond the project description, because there's a lot of different elements that are involved that are not necessarily put on the project description. So we'll go over that to hopefully expand our thought process a little bit. But
yeah, I mean, there's all this empty land. Why are you picking a forest wetland to put in a building? I mean, to me, that's just stupid.
Yeah.
But that's me. Okay. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, as Susie said, the pages that follow this initial public notice page will have more details about the project. And that this is one of those examples of, the comments having to stay within the regulation. You'd have to look in the wetlands law and see what the permit requirements are, and whether this particular project, if you could point out some way that this particular project isn't meeting some of the permit requirements. It's tempting just to write in and say, well, no, we'd much rather have the forested wetland than the industrial building. But that may not be within the agency's authority, if that makes sense.
I just wrote a letter to the Indiana Forest Commission on their wanting to cut down some really old forested areas for no reason. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, does anybody else have any questions regarding the isolated wetland permit or anything on IDEM's website? Indra, I don't think I'm able to access the chat. I don't know if there's any questions in there. I don't want to miss anything.
Right, yeah, no, not yet. So yeah, I think you can go ahead and go on.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to step 3. So the third step is to get ourselves organized. And this is going to be really critical because we are tracking these permits ultimately with the goal of submitting public comments, right? And submitting public comments can be a really research intensive process. So you want to create a landing space for all that research. And the first thing that you want to do is create a new folder or identify an existing file location to save your work. So that way, if you see a permit and you want to download and save that public notice that you are looking into, you can access them easier instead of having to navigate to the website each time. And you also have a space, like I said, for all of your research when you start to prepare public comments. This next point is optional, but you can also create an Excel spreadsheet to record permits. So say you're tracking multiple counties or you have a large area and you come across several permits that concern you. You can consider creating an Excel spreadsheet that includes a permits of concern tab. So that way you are able to see all of those permits in one place. And once you've submitted a few public comments, you may also want to create a submitted permits tab for your own records. All right, so now that we've talked about tracking water permits, so we've signed up for our notifications, we've gone through the agency website and looked up a few permits, and hopefully we've got a little bit organized. Let's talk about prioritizing them. So prioritization is really an advanced phase of tracking where we are going to consider the overall scope of permit impacts that we are looking at. So I like to think of water permits being kind of ironic, right? So on one end, they have really helped curb pollution because they've made the development process a little more expensive and a little more lengthier. However, at the end of the day, they still are authorizing some form of pollution. So all of the water permits that you come across are going to be impactful to some degree. So our job when we prioritize is really to be able to utilize our time efficiently so that way we can identify the most important permits to prepare effective public comments. All right, so this leads us into the question of what should we consider? So I mentioned in the earlier slide, we are going to consider the overall scope of permit impacts. But before we do that, I just want you guys to take a few moments and think about these two questions. So where are you tracking permits? And why are you tracking permits? And if you haven't identified an area, just brainstorm where you might be interested in tracking. All right, so I asked this because depending on where and why you are tracking permits, that is going to ultimately shape what you are commenting on, right? So the considerations that I'm going to go over in the following slides are going to be subjective, and ultimately they'll be up to you. So this is a mind map that I created to illustrate all of the different things that you might consider when deciding to comment on a particular water permit. So here we have the water permit, right? So some things you might consider are the waterway significance or surrounding land use. You could think about the water quality, the size of impacts, the comment deadline, compliance history, socioeconomic factors, design alternatives, and for Nittis permits, you might think about the discharge quality and quantity, or you might just think about if it's a new, renewal, or modification permit. And so when we think about a water permit, and this goes back to your question, Barbara, but the permit itself is typically only concerned with that particular regulated water resource, right? But as we can kind of see here, there's a lot of other things that are going on besides what they're saying is happening. And so when you're prioritizing permits, this is really the time to consider all of those different factors that go into a water permit. So not just those class 2 forested wetlands that are only going to be impacted by 0.7 acres of fill, right? So I'm going to briefly run through all of these different considerations. And I just want to note that these considerations might be knowledge that you have already, or if it's not knowledge that you don't have already, again, we're going to be sending a handout sometime next week that will give you specific resources and tools on where to access this information. All right, so one thing you might consider is the compliance history. So is the permittee complying with the terms of their permit? For example, the steel plants in Northwest Indiana have a history of being chronic violators, right? So they pose significant health risks because they aren't meeting the state or federal guidelines for environmental protection. So that might be one thing you consider is a permittee's compliance history. Another thing you might consider is the comment deadline. So ask yourself, when are the public comments due? And do you feel like you have enough time? So we really want to avoid working in a deadline-induced panic, right? At least that's the case for me. So because there's a lot of things that we can miss when we add that level of stress and those deadlines to our current workload. So just be mindful about what you have going on, because a more thorough investigation is more likely to influence the overall outcome of the permit. Another thing you might consider is the significance of the waterway. So are you targeting a single stream? Are you targeting a specific lake? Are you targeting a specific wetland? Or are you targeting an entire watershed? So for example, HEC tracks development in the upper White River watershed. So all of those streams and wetlands in the watershed will be significant to us, which means that we are looking for all of those waterways in the permit application. And so this consideration really serves as one of the guiding considerations, and there's a lot of other things that we'll have to account for. Another thing you might consider is the size of impacts. So how much wetland or stream will be impacted? And are water features being properly classified? So this is important because the size of impacts is dependent on how wetlands are classified for state wetlands. And I'll provide an example of this in the following slides. But if this is something you're interested in investigating, you will need to obtain the waters report from the permit manager. And again, we'll be sending a handout next week, which will have instructions on how to access that. And then the size of impacts, I just want to know, it does not apply to floodway or Nittis permits. All right, so this is a photo of a proposed parking lot expansion for a FedEx distribution center, and they were applying for a state isolated wetland permit to fill these class 3 wetlands, which are indicated by these little gray spots here. And so we commented on the permit because this area that's right here, which I know it's really hard to see, the image is pretty fuzzy, but this area right here is a protected nature preserve owned by the Central Indiana Land Trust. And so these class 2 wetlands shared a boundary with these protected wetlands. So our comments requested that these wetlands be reclassified as class 3 rather than class 2. So the wetlands were class 2, and this is a table from their original permit application, and you can see the class 2 and the class 1, a few class 1 wetlands as well. And the mitigation ratio of 8.7, which is going to be right over here. And so in response to our comments, they reclassified everything as class 3. And this bumped the mitigation ratio up to 9.35. So this is really just an example of how the size of impacts and the mitigation required is really dependent on wetland classifications for state wetlands. Another thing you might consider is the water quality. So is the waterway low quality? And this image might look familiar to some people who keep up with the news in northwestern Indiana because it's from a recent spill up there. And so I just wanted to highlight that. But you might ask, is the waterway subject to frequent spills, algal blooms, trash dumping, fish kills, or anything else that might impair its water quality? Or you might ask, is the waterway high quality? So can it support wildlife habitat, recreation, or fishing? And I specifically included this image because these birds right here are sandhill cranes, which are some of the coolest birds ever. But you'll note that this wetland doesn't have any water. And if you remove these sandhill cranes from this image, you might not think that this wetland is high quality, right? So I just wanted to highlight that to not judge a book by its cover, basically. And this leads me also to my next point, that high quality does not necessarily mean undeveloped. So this is a satellite image of the FedEx parking lot expansion project that I discussed earlier. And those wetlands that were all reclassified as class 3 wetlands, you'll see are located right here. And so these really high quality wetlands are just totally surrounded by urban development. So I just wanted to highlight that just because something is in an urban area, or you look at a satellite imagery and it might just look like rainwater runoff, really take the time to look in and see and investigate that area. So another thing you might consider is the surrounding land use. So is it next to a sensitive ecological site? And you can take that sensitive ecological site pretty lightly because we really just mean an area with potential. So somewhere that's not paved over with the parking lot. So this could be open space, a park or nature preserve, a river or stream corridor, a large undisturbed area, or old agricultural land with wetlands and forest. And I'm just going to back up for just a second so I can provide an example. So in the case of these public comments, the surrounding land use was one of the major factors on why we decided to comment, right? Because they were proposing to build a parking lot right here next to a nature preserve. So that was one of the determining factors. So I just wanted to provide that example. All right, so you might also consider if there's any other design alternatives. And again, this is the same photo I showed you earlier of the original design plans for the FedEx parking lot expansion. And you will see that they do not incorporate any stormwater control measures, right? They just are simply building this parking lot space. So in response to our comments, they revised the design, and this graphic is kind of messy. So the only thing you really need to pay attention to are these red boxes right here. But you'll see that they expanded part of the pond. They added some constructed wetlands that were adjacent to the Browning Marsh, which was right here. And then they also added a wet detention basin. So this is just an example of how you can think about an alternative design. So whether that it might be a different type of layout, or it could be additional stormwater quality measures. So another thing you might think about is socioeconomic factors. So let's say you're not interested in tracking water permits specifically, but you are advocating for environmental justice in your community. So water permits can have community implications, especially if they're tied to a large housing development project. So for example, if a new housing development comes in a primarily low income area, this has the ability to displace those residents, right? Because oftentimes those brand new homes have median home prices that are 5 times the average salary of the community. So whether you're from an environmental justice community or advocating for one or both, something you might ask is it adjacent to a low income neighborhood? Or what is the nature or need for development? So for example, is it a grocery store they're proposing to build versus a new housing development? So finally, we are going to talk about some additional considerations for NIPDES. So NIPDES stands for the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And it was established in Section 402 of the Clean Water Act. And what NIPDES does is it regulates point source discharges into waters of the United States. And a more technical way of looking at it is that it regulates the specific effluent, which is just the water that's coming out of a discrete conveyance, a discrete pipe, and then going into receiving waters. So some things you might ask yourself when looking at a NIPDES permit are, what is the quantity of the discharge? So what is the volume of water coming out of the pipe and going into the receiving waters? And this is usually given in millions of gallons per day in the NIPDES permit application. And then another thing you might consider is, what is the quality of the discharge? So one thing you could look for is if the permittee is discharging any biocumulative pollutants. So those things like lead and mercury that have the ability to concentrate up the food chain, biomagnify, and be really persistent in our environment. So that's just some things you want to look out for when you are thinking about a NIPDES permit. And there's going to be one more consideration for NIPDES, and that is if it is a new, renewal, or modified permit application. So This is going to be especially important when you're preparing public comments, because depending on the type of permit, it will be subject to different regulations. But for now, just focus on identifying whether it is a new, renewal, or a modified permit application. All right, so I know I probably overloaded you guys with a lot of information for tracking and prioritizing in a really short amount of time. So let's just briefly recap what we went over. So you want to sign up for notifications and stay on top of tracking, right? So that way you can identify permits of concern really quickly and not have to work in that deadline-induced panic. Then you want to get organized. So identify a file location or create an existing file location, save your public notices, create an Excel spreadsheet if you want to track multiple permits, and mark those comment deadlines in your calendar. And lastly, those considerations that I went over can be tailored to your own interests. So there might have been some things that I included that you don't think about, or there might have been some things I didn't include that you do think about. So I encourage you guys to create a mind map of your own. So that image I showed you with all the hexagons, create a mind map on the things you will consider as you go through and try to identify those permits that you really want to comment on. And so with that, I will hand it off to you, Indra.
Great, thank you, Susie. So if you've gone through these steps, you've signed up for notifications, you've been watching the agency website and prioritizing which permits you want to work on, the next step would be actually drafting a comment. Next. And the first thing I wanted to say was, don't be intimidated. It will just go, a step at a time. So next slide. So for drafting comments, there are a few things I want to point out for you to have in mind, but we're going to be going into more depth in the next webinar. Next. You'll need to read the documents carefully, and that'll be your starting point. You will probably need to gather information about the impacted waterway from sources other than just the permit application. And next, you'll be gathering information also about the proposed regulated activity. For example, you might look into the business or the person who's proposing it and find out if they have a history elsewhere. You might learn more about that a type of industry if it's an industry related proposal, and those are things that can help inform your comments. Next. And it's important to learn how the relevant regulation applies, because the agency's authority is limited by the regulation. They're only going to be able to respond to comments that are related to their regulatory authority. Actually, along those lines, I wanted to mention that the agencies have web pages that summarize the relevant regulations. And sometimes there are also additional documents that can be helpful. For example, under the wetlands law, classification of the wetland is important. IDEM has a separate 2-page document about how wetlands are classified. So if you've decided to work on a wetland permit, you'll probably want to dig out the 2-page document about classification. And then finally, it is often helpful to get other people involved, people who have scientific backgrounds that might be relevant, maybe somebody who knows about wetland ecosystems, an environmental scientist, a wetland consultant, maybe a chemist who could help look at a proposed permit for discharging into a waterway, or maybe someone with legal expertise who might be able to help. At the Hoosier Environmental Council, we have a limited staff, but we can often help, or at least point to someone who would be able to help. So let's go to the next slide. There are some features of comments that are effective. So comments that can actually have an effect include the comments that next identify problems with the permit application. That can be very useful to the agency, or comments that identify flaws in a draft permit. And it may sound here like I'm listing items that the agency personnel ought to be taking care of, finding problems in the application or finding flaws in a draft permit. But a couple of things to keep in mind. One, some of our agencies are short-staffed and they're doing the best that they can. Also, a second set of eyes never hurts. You could be helping the agency personnel out by finding things that they had overlooked. And the next item is that you might be able to provide information that otherwise the agency personnel might not have come across. Maybe you know something more about that wetland or waterway, that the person at the agency doesn't know. Maybe you know something more about the business that's applying for the permit. So providing additional information to help inform the agency's decisions, that's helpful. The next would be offering solutions when possible. We often get into the mode of just trying to find what's wrong, right? What's wrong with the permit application or what's wrong with the draft permit. Where you can, if possible, after you've identified a problem, offer what a solution might be. Like with the wetland example that Susie talked about, there were alternatives. They could shift how they were building that parking lot in a way that actually reduced its impact. And here I've listed offer support as well as critique. If you're reading through a permit application or a draft permit and you see things you like, things that are environmentally beneficial, go ahead and comment on those too and point out that you support them. It helps the agency to include good things in a permit if they have documented support for those things. And then the next is the most important, and that's why I put it in bold, and that's to request actions that the agency has the legal authority to take. It can be very tempting to just say that, this is a permit for an activity that shouldn't exist. But unfortunately, comments like that might not have any effect because it might be outside of the agency's authority to put a complete stop on something. So the most effective comments are those that actually stay within the regulatory framework. And that's what we're going to go into the next time we get together. If you could go to the next slide. Stay tuned for part 2, which will be how to write effective public comments. We're aiming for the 3rd week in January, and you can send me an email if you'd like to sign up. Also, I'll be circulating an announcement once we make a firm date. And the next slide, I just wanted to point out that Greening the State House, which is our annual conference, is coming up next Friday and Saturday, November 19th and 20th. One of the panels on Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time is going to focus on wetlands. In particular, we're going to look at options for local governments, and we're going to have a speaker from a national organization who's going to talk about successful wetland permits in other states. With that, let me say that it's 8 o'clock, and if you need to go, I perfectly understand, but I think Susie and I can stay on for a few minutes if you'd like to ask questions. There are a few in the chat, so Susie, why don't I start with those for the folks who can stick around, and if you'll maybe close the PowerPoint. So Susan asks, how do you know what the surrounding land use is? If it's an area that's close to you, of course, it might be land that you're familiar with, or that, an area that you're familiar with. Another source would be Google Maps and the satellite view on Google Maps. There are land use and zoning maps for the counties that have zoning. So sometimes that could be helpful. And I know there's also a national wetlands inventory. These are the kinds of things that we're going to include in the written guide as resources. Susie, anything else on how you would know what the surrounding land use is?
Yeah, I would just agree with you on, especially using Google Maps. That is something that I use all the time, just to first look at the satellite imagery, just to tell if it is an open space or an area with water features, or if it's an already developed area. But there's going to be some specific resources that we'll include in the guide. And one of them is a mapping tool called Beacon. So you're actually able to click on like a specific parcel and see who owns it. And so that should be able to tell you a little more information on the specific land use. So for example, that FedEx building permit that we commented on, that nature preserve, it just kind of looked like some random area of land with water features. But when using that resource, we clicked on it and discovered that it was owned by the Central Indiana Land Trust and ended up being a protected marsh wetland. So we'll include those resources for you so that you're able to figure out the surrounding land use.
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I guess you've answered the question, how did you learn that there was a nature preserve next door?
Oh, I guess so.
Yeah, and then what should be done in a case where the Army Corps issued a permit erroneously? So we're actually going to have our staff attorney on for the next webinar. I know that permits can be challenged right after they've been issued. There's kind of a 2-week, 3-week period where a permit can be open to challenge. After that, I'm not entirely sure what the options are. So we'd have to get our attorney Kim Ferraro in on to really answer that one. And then what to do if there's been wetland filling that was done without a permit. It was done outside of the regulatory process. So somebody came along, filled a wetland just because they wanted to. The first line on that one would be calling IDEM's complaint line. That's where they take information about potential violations. So that's, I guess that's the first place to go, is letting IDEM know that there's been a potential violation in your area so that they can look into it. Lisa mentions that Beacon is great, but unfortunately not available for all counties. So also good to know. I think we've gone through the questions that were put into the chat. Does anybody want to unmute for all right. And so seeing no further questions, I was going to go ahead and wrap up for tonight. Look for a notice about the next webinar that'll focus on how to draft effective comments. And like I said, we're aiming for the 3rd week in January for that one. Thanks, everybody, and have a good evening.